It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest. After deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan with the U.S. Army and National Guard, Joshua Childress took a job as an agent on the U.S. Border Patrol, spending 7 years catching illegal border crossers. But what makes him interesting is that after becoming convinced by the pro-immigration position, he actually felt obligated to resign his post and is now living as a private citizen. Joshua Childress, thank you very much for joining us on Consumer Choice Radio.
David, thanks for having me.
Great. So for our listeners, I mean, I've kind of given them a bit of a taste of what your story is, but if you wouldn't mind just elaborating on your role in the Border Patrol, what that actually entailed, because I don't think a lot of people really know, and then what were the reasons why you felt like you just couldn't hold that position anymore?
Sure. So my formal title was Border Patrol Agent. Um, I was technically a Fed, as they like to say. Um, but yeah, on a daily basis, I would show up to work, usually late at night. I chose to work the evening shifts because that's where all the activity is. I'd show up, check out a truck, check out my weaponry, which was a fully automatic M4 rifle, same thing I used in the military. Um, get my stuff ready, go to a quick briefing to find out what's happened in the last 24 hours, and just head out to the border and kind of drive around looking for somebody to go chase. Um, and I mean, I explain it that way. It sounds a little sexier than it actually was. Like it's a strange job where 90% of the time you're driving about 3 miles an hour looking for footprints in the sand, and then it can go from 0 to 100 real fast. But yeah, I mean, just day in, day out, that was our bread and butter, was looking for footprints in the sand. Our biggest tool was our radio and our flashlight to communicate with other people and to track the footprints. So I basically was, hunting people for that entire time that I was there.
And Joshua, you came to prominence with many of your different articles that you had written. You had different interviews. You talked about how you had sort of come to learn of the different positions that one could have on immigration thanks to podcasting, things like Thaddeus Russell's Unregistered and your article in the Daily Beast. And I'm wondering what the sort of initial reaction to you coming out and writing this and being very public was, either with your family or friends, those around you, or perhaps former colleagues, and maybe some of their comments.
Wow. Well, my parents were used to it. They're kind of used to me being a radical in one direction or another. So my parents were not all that surprised. My granny, she's, bless her heart, she's 87 years old, and she still has a hard time kind of wrapping her head around, one, that I would give up a career with the pay and benefits that were entailed, but just the idea of, she's kind of your typical Fox News viewer. No, not typical, because she's a lot nicer, but she lives in that paradigm. So for her, the idea that we would change the way that we approach something as big as immigration was just a mystery, and I think still somewhat of a mystery to her. Most of my friends, even those who didn't really understand where I was coming from, were pretty supportive, and that even goes for as I was leaving the Border Patrol. The majority of the people that I actually knew were like, "Hey, man, I disagree with you, but it was a pleasure working with you. Best of luck." All of the management was pretty respectful and kind of surprised to see me go, because I was, known as a a go-getter within the agency. That being said, these are people that I'm, actually knew and intimately involved with. I did find out after I left that, so Reason Magazine did a little video on me, and apparently that video made it to Facebook, to the actually, yeah, people kind of know about it now, the internal Border Patrol Facebook group. So apparently I became famous on that, and actually a buddy of mine who had transferred to the northern border called me out of the blue, and he's like, "Man, I just saw this video. Is everything okay, man? Are you fine?" I was like, "Well, yeah, I'm fine. What's going on?" He's like, "Man, I saw all the comments underneath this video, and like they were vicious. They were bad." I was like, "No, I've never been a member of that Facebook group, so I didn't know anything about it. But we can all use our imaginations how people talk on Facebook." So
welcome to the internet. Yeah, that's par for the course.
Yeah. Here comes the outrage mob. I mean, the Biden presidency now is less than a week old. The two of Biden's first actions are immigration related. One to protect DACA, or to preserve DACA, and the other is to provide a comprehensive framework for a path to citizenship for the 11 million illegal or undocumented immigrants who are currently living in the United States. What I wanted to ask you is, when you were working for the Border Patrol, who were the people that you were actually finding? I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about who is actually trying to cross the border, and so I'd love for you to let our listeners know the type of people who were fleeing across the border.
So I worked in Yuma my whole time in the Border Patrol, Yuma, Arizona. So for those that don't know, it's kind of right at the corner where Arizona and California and Mexico meet. So that little corner of the state of Arizona was where I did the majority of my work. And so towards the end, it was the vast majority of what we were seeing was, the quote unquote big scary caravans, the women and children coming from Central America, mostly Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, that kind of thing. So that was the vast majority of the last couple of years, and that's who we were seeing. But as far as people coming from Mexico and other places, it's you run the gamut. But I mean, most of them were people who, unskilled labor. It was people who are looking for work, and we would catch people periodically with criminal histories and whatnot, and that kind of stuff always gets twisted around in the media that, oh well, obviously we know what Trump has said, and I'm not going to give him any more airtime on his opinions of the people that cross over. But that's something that I've kind of come to realize after the fact, that is, just because somebody has a criminal history doesn't mean that they haven't also moved on, and they're still just looking to improve their life, looking to work, and likely send money back to family members. That's the beauty of the system we have right now is, if you're in a dire situation, you can get a pretty low level job and make enough money to work and send money back to support a family. I mean, that's what a lot of these people are doing. They're living a bare bones existence here, which is still better than what they were living, before they came, and then sending what they can back to family. So that's, I mean, the vast majority of who we came into contact with was people looking to come and work.
Yeah, that's a very important point. We're speaking with Joshua Childress here on the Big Talker 1067 FM Consumer Choice Radio. Joshua, I had a question about something that's been brought up in many sort of civil privacy and civil liberties discussions, and that's the idea of the 100-mile border zone. And this is something that's been brought up a lot by the ACLU. And we saw in probably the last decade an increase of Border Patrol agents who would be a bit further from directly on the U.S.-Mexico border, and would be interacting with people and having their immigration question or status questioned. Can you provide some context on that? Because we can all see YouTube videos, but we don't really understand what's going on. What's the law? Kind of what was that all about?
So the 100 air miles for our purposes, for Border Patrol purposes, you had to have a certain criteria to be able to prosecute and deport under expedited removal guidelines. And at the time, that was, we had to catch them within 14 days of their entry, and we had to catch them within 100 air miles of the border. So kind of a straight line from the border to any point, with as long as we would apprehend them within that distance and that time period, we were generally able to kind of, you're not technically circumventing due process, but more or less you are able to just prosecute, run through an immigration judge and deport in a very short amount of time. So that's why that framework is kind of, for prosecutorial reasons, that's why it was important to us. For civil liberties reasons, if you happen to live anywhere in that 100 air miles, the barrier for initiating an investigation, which is what we called, basically talking to anybody that we thought was suspicious, that barrier is very low, like very low. So whereas, a normal police officer technically has to have, a fairly high level of suspicion before they can actually stop you to investigate you for a crime. A much lower barrier for doing the same action, for performing the same activities as far as like a vehicle stop, or just kind of initiating a consensual encounter with somebody walking along because they may fit a description or whatever. You can kind of just, for whatever reason, begin to investigate. So the Border Patrol has used that to set up checkpoints. So these checkpoints is probably what you're talking about on the YouTube videos. Basically, any major pathway through if it's on a major highway or anything like that, whatever the major route to get from anywhere along the border is going to have a checkpoint. So my station didn't actually have a checkpoint, but our sister station ran a checkpoint on the Interstate 8. So that would, if you were going to Phoenix or LA from anywhere along the border, you had to get on that interstate. So right next to my station, there was a checkpoint. And if you were headed in the other direction, there was another checkpoint. So anywhere you went along that major roadway, you had to go through a checkpoint.
And that just sounds like it's something that's ripe for abuse.
Well,
in
yeah.
terms
So Arizona and California, pretty much the whole time I was there, had legal or medical approved cannabis. Well, neither of those laws apply federally. So you had people who thought they were in compliance with the law, had their card, had their weights and measurements in order, and would still get stopped, harassed, have their things confiscated, destroyed, sometimes have their vehicles torn apart, just based on having something that's otherwise legal in your state.
Yeah, I can see definitely very ripe for abuse. That's crazy to see. I mean, I've
Well,
just the
and
videos that I've seen. It's just people who are questioning, and it's just not really understood why these borders are set up. Obviously they bring up questions of profiling or something like this. Oh, because I speak with an accent, or because I have darker skin, or something like this. Yeah, it just seems like it was very problematic in terms of carrying that out.
right. So and the checkpoints, as well as the ports of entry, where we didn't actually work the ports of entry. There was they call it the Office of Field Operations, or CDP, that mans the actual ports of entry where people come in and out. But so that already low barrier for initiating an investigation that we enjoyed within that 100 air miles, at a checkpoint or a port of entry, that's even lower. I mean, but the law states, at least this is what we were taught in the academy, mere suspicion, which can be translated as a gut feeling. So based on a gut feeling of illegal activity, a federal agent at a checkpoint can stop you and detain you for as long as is necessary to conduct an investigation, which could mean just tearing apart your car. And if they don't find anything, the repercussion is, well, here's a form, and within 30 days or whatever they give you, yeah, fill this out, send it in, and the government might reimburse you a little bit for what we did to your car.
Jeez, just ripping it up. And were you, because I've dealt with this, and from my own background, I'm Canadian born and became naturalized, so I'm very familiar with the Customs and Border Patrol, shepherding back and forth between the U.S. and Canada. The question that I have is, were you also tasked at times with doing a bit more research or investigations? The reason I ask is because I've had officers ask me about my social media accounts, online stuff. Are there perhaps situations where you're alerted that someone might be about to enter that you're kind of forced to track, or anything like that?
Not generally. I mean, sometimes if sometimes there would be kind of bulletins from other agencies, saying that yes, we believe, but that was usually like cartel matters. That was usually like things that, when they would find out about some kind of cartel infighting or whatever, they would just say, hey, look out in this area for the next period of time. We never really got anything as far as like looking for citizens or anything like that. And I honestly, I mean, I've heard the reports of people being asked at ports of entry for information about social media and stuff like that, especially when it comes to journalists, because they were kind of enemy number one under the Trump administration. Well, depending on what you reported, but yeah, that was just never anything that maybe I never made it to that echelon of responsibility. But yeah, that was never something I really experienced.
And so, on the way forward, in terms of what the U.S. can do, I'm interested in terms of what your take is on. Obviously, you no longer hold the views that you used to have when you held that position, but maybe explain to our readers now what your views are, and maybe what your hopes are for the Biden administration in regards to immigration.
Well, Brian Kaplan has actually he wrote a book called Open Borders. Thanks to David for a couple of years back inviting me to LibertyCon to speak at that wonderful event. I was able to meet Brian Kaplan, and just through that chance encounter, he ended up sending me an advanced copy of Open Borders, so I was able to read that. And I mean, I was already pretty well convinced, but like after reading that book, there's just almost no good reason to treat immigration the way that we continue to treat it. I would say, so, you know, a lot of the stuff that Biden is proposing, I think is great. I mean, DACA seems like a no-brainer to me. The temporary protected status, I think, you know, makes a lot of sense. Having a pathway to citizenship makes a lot of sense. But honestly, I mean, short of just going full anarchic, open borders, free for all, which, you know, to be honest, I would kind of love. I think the two best things we can do to kind of improve the situation for people looking to come here and people who don't actually want to come here, who just are kind of fleeing violence. Number one, the best thing we can do is end the war on drugs. I mean, people kind of look at me sideways when I say that, you know, unless you're already convinced of this, but the war on drugs is the reason Mexico is such a hellhole. And Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador especially. I mean, the US demand for illicit drugs is almost entirely satiated by Central America and Mexico. So if we were able to move that industry to the US, I mean, imagine one, the jobs created if we were to start manufacturing our own illicit substances. Imagine how much safer those substances would be. And imagine the power that we would be taking away from the cartels who are making life very, very difficult for people in these areas. So the first thing we can do to solve immigration is stop making people's countries so awful to live in. And a good chunk of them might not ever want to leave. But you know, I'm not necessarily interested in convincing people not to come, because you know what, I love eating people's food from different places. I love meeting people who've had a different life experience. I like the, you know, kind of the beauty of what immigration brings us. So if people do want to come, even after we've you know, eliminated the war on drugs and made their countries safer to live in, I mean, a pathway to citizenship is great for those who want it, but I've just, from, you know, every person that I caught, I had to interview, and then, you know, whenever I would be assigned to processing, we would have to do even more in-depth interviews with these people. Most people that I talked to had zero interest in becoming a citizen. They wanted to come, work for a period, save up some money, usually save up enough money to go back and buy a piece of land so that they weren't beholden to somebody else in their home country, and then leave. So, you know, having all these big fancy bells and whistles immigration policies looks good, and yeah, it's, you know, it probably gets some politicians' votes. It doesn't really seem like those things are what people, at least the people that I was, you know, maybe the higher skilled immigrants are, you know, they're not coming through the southern border. They're not crossing like that. So maybe there is a need for those kind of regulations to be played with a little bit. But for, you know, the people that I was interacting with, the people that I was apprehending and deporting, a broad-based worker program where you can show up, get your piece of paper stamped saying, I'm allowed to be here, I can work as long as I need to, I can, you know, rent a house, I can go to the grocery store without fear of just being snatched up by some ICE agent or whatever. You know, I think that right there, you know, between the drug war and a broad-based worker program, and sure, if you've stayed here and worked here for several years and you like it and you want to become a citizen, by all means, go ahead, do the work, get the citizenship. I'm not really convinced that that's what most people want.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say the guest worker program, because there is one in Canada called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, and it's very much like what you described. Now, it's not at the scale that would maybe be ideal, but it's people who come from predominantly South America or Latin America, and they take jobs in the wineries, picking grapes, or in the agricultural sector, and they'll be here for the season, or like the summer season or harvest season, and then they go home. And at least from my view, everybody is better off. They get to earn way more money than they otherwise would. They provide us with a super valuable service at a obviously a competitive price. They get to make their lives better for their family and whomever they're supporting at home. And it's very much like what you said. It's just people looking for a job. And
Right.
if there are jobs there, which more often there are not, more often than not there are, why not let them fill that gap as needed? So I mean, that's an interesting point. On a lot of people get wrapped up in, when we talk about immigration, they'll be like, well, what if they don't speak the language, or what if their culture is different, or what if they vote? I mean, I hear conservatives say this all the time. They'll be like, well, but they're only going to vote for Democrats. And it's like, well, a temporary foreign worker program pretty much knocks all of those arguments out, because they're not voting. Who cares what language they're speaking? They're here to work. All of those questions. It's like, okay, well, all of those concerns are now thrown out. Not that there aren't even good solutions to solve those as well, but it's just a very simple way of saying, okay, yeah, I mean, if you want to come here and you want to apply yourself and make money and ultimately go home, or maybe you don't, and you want to go through the process to become a citizen at one point. Let's kind of open that door for people in that mutually beneficial way. So super interesting.
A couple of things on that you just brought up. The voting. I mean, Cato has done some great work on this. The vast majority of people who come here, especially in the lower skills, have almost no interest in voting. Most of them, once they get the permanent resident card, where that's kind of your golden ticket. I mean, once you've got the permanent resident card, you've got to mess up pretty bad before you're deported. So once you have that permanent resident card, most people are like very happy. They can come and go as they please. They have legitimate status. But you need to take that extra step, and it's a lot of money, a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting. Most people just aren't that interested in casting a vote. And if they are, well, they vote Democrat for a reason. And that's not because that's how most people identify. Because people might be surprised to hear this. I actually talked to several people who were excited, illegal immigrants, people that I arrested and was about to deport. They were excited that Trump was coming on. This is, I left in 2018, so this was some time ago. But they were excited for Trump because Trump meant business to them. So to them, Trump was going to come fix the economy. That meant more jobs. That meant, well, next time they try to get in, there might be a job waiting for them when they get here. So I don't think these people care about politics to the degree that one might assume. They care about, is there going to be a job here when I get here? So yeah, Cato has shown they don't really vote. They don't really care. And they vote Democrat because the Republicans call them freeloaders and pests and rapists and murderers. Why would you vote for somebody who portrays an entire group of people that way? I mean, the majority of the people that I interacted with were hardworking, Catholic or Christian. They would fit right into the Republican milieu. But if the Republicans are going to demonize and badmouth them, well, they're just gonna go look somewhere else. If they have an interest at all.
And what's interesting on that note of Cato is they've also done some questionnaire and polling to migrants to figure out, beyond party affiliation, what do they actually think? And pretty much across every immigration class, issue by issue, they're within the margin of error for your average American.
Right.
So it's not like people, and this includes refugees. So these are people who are just fleeing because they absolutely have to, because the cartel has overrun their town, or they're from Syria and their country has been taken over by ISIS or civil war, what have you. These people come here, and when you poll them, they're pretty close to the average opinion of your ordinary American. And I think the best way it was put was, like, on a couple issues, there's about a 3-year lag. And so if you were to frame it as like, okay, well, we would like to have 500 people be given their ability to work here, and it would be 500 people from 2018. Would that scare anyone? No. They'd be like, oh, okay, like that's fine. So it's interesting to know, and I mean it's a shame that we have to wrap up, because that could be a whole 2-hour conversation about the nuances and the ins and outs of all of those, all of the responses to the anti-immigration position. But Josh, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story and your experience. And as immigration comes up, we'll certainly think of you and have you back on to talk about what's next.
Yeah, please do. And thanks again for having me. That was great.
Of course. Thank you.
Perfect.